Hey there everybody, I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox and you are about to see a video 3 years in the making as I visit 10 fantastic board games that I like to play solo. Yes, welcome back to the channel, and I mean that very honestly. I have not visited this subject in almost 4 years. My first top 10 solo list came out in May of 2021. It's currently April of 2025, and I'll tell you, that video has done a lot of good for this channel. Over 22,000 views since that video came out, and since then I have always wanted to revisit this subject, but the simple fact of the matter is I just don't do that much solo board gaming. I do tend to prefer the multiplayer experience, especially at 2 players. However, I do like to visit a solo game if it's a theme or has mechanisms that I just really enjoy playing, but especially if I want to try and get better at playing that game for the next multiplayer experience. I will tend to visit games from a solo aspect. So if you tend to prefer solo gaming, you probably haven't been to the channel here in a couple years, and I really hope you're going to like what you're going to see. I will tell you that these are 10 all new games. I'm not revisiting any of the games from the previous list. At the end of this list, I'll kind of show you how the two intertwine with each other. I'm also going to introduce this list of qualifiers. A lot of times when I'm thinking about playing a game solo, I do tend to kind of weigh these 5 things in my mind. The first is setup. How much more complicated is the game to set up for the solo experience versus playing multiplayer. For example, if I've got to set up multiple player boards, usually I can just pass the components off to the other players and they can set up their own board. But if I have to do that for the AI myself, how much more work is it? Secondly, how much more difficult is it to learn, especially to remember the rules for playing the game solo? And I'll tell you that if I get to a rule book and there's page upon page upon page of rules for the solo game, it's probably not going to be on this list. I'll just tell you that right now. Third is managing your opponent or your AI, sort of bots, whatever it might be, in the solo game. How much do I have to consider and manage when it's not my turn, when I'm sort of managing that AI? How much do I have to do? Are there a lot of if then else sort of flow charting rules to get through? Is it just maybe moving some components quickly, blocking spaces, that kind of a thing? I'll get into that. The fourth item I think is the most important for me personally, and that is how similar is the experience if I'm playing it solo or playing it competitively. Again, if I'm trying to get better at a game, I want that experience to be the same whether I'm playing it by myself or playing against other players. So if it's a very different game in the solo aspect, then it may not really help me, and that's certainly something that I'll touch upon in this video. And lastly, how satisfying is it to play this game solo? Does it feel like a rewarding experience? Do I feel like I'm getting something out of it? Am I learning? Am I getting better at it? Am I just having fun playing it? Does the victory feel rewarding? Did I sort of know halfway through the game that, yeah, I was going to win this, or I definitely wasn't going to win this? And so I'll kind of delve into that as well. All right, I think I've already introduced a little too much here. Let's go ahead and get to the list. All right, here we go. Number 10 on this list, believe it or not, is Twilight Inscription by Fantasy Flight Games. This is a roll and write version of the massively epic Twilight Imperium board game, which I've only ever played once, and I did like it, but I've been hesitant to ever play it again. I will also say that I am not a fan of roll and write games at all. I think this is one of maybe 2 in this entire room of games. However, I had heard that this was a pretty decent solo experience, and I wanted to check it out, and I'm glad I did. In this game, you are really just trying to play a very efficient engine with something of a civilization that's represented on these 4 boards in front of you. You have industry, you have warfare, you have technology, you have navigation, and all these different things that you're trying to manage from game to game. On each of your turns, you will pick one of those 4 boards that you're going to work with in that round, and then you're going to chuck some dice and do whatever you can with the symbols that you roll. And there is a bit of combos that will trigger off. You may even be able to affect other boards by things that you're doing on a current board, and that just keeps things moving at a pretty interesting pace. Of course, with the solo experience, you get plenty of time to think about what you're doing. You have plenty of time to manage out the efficiency of all your plays and trying to get the most done with every turn in the game. All right, let's get to the qualifiers. Your setup is pretty much the same competitively versus solo. You only have one board that you're going to add into play if you've got a AI bot to manage. So pretty simple there. As far as the teach goes, there's a little bit of extra things that you have to try and deal with. It's really not too extreme. There is this idea of your voting on various policies, on some abilities or bonuses that come up throughout the game. And of course, competitively, you're trying to outbid your other opponents on these policies. But with the AI, what you simply do is you have to draw policies and you have to find ones that sort of counteract each other. And the rules explain that, but you're going to have a positive and a negative. The AI is going to cast so many votes, and if you are able to cast more votes than them, then you will simply get the positive aspect of whatever those policies are. And that's really it. There's not this idea of, other people may be able to shoot something down. You're just kind of managing it against the AI. Once you get that understood, it's a pretty easy game to manage. As far as managing the AI, it's very straightforward. Whenever you're rolling dice, they just sort of get to check off these tracks that they're working towards. You're kind of racing against the AI in that aspect. They can't even get to Mechatol Rex before you. They can trigger off some common goals that players would typically work towards. They can beat you to those as well. And so again, on your turn, you can kind of see the board state and decide, well, do I want to try and work on this board to beat them to that objective? But maybe I'm really close to triggering off this big combo move. And so you've got some interesting decision space there, which keeps this pretty fun. As far as similarity between the solo and competitive game, I don't really know because I've never played this game competitively. Obviously, that voting system on those policies is going to be unique. The warfare is also a little bit unique because your AI represents this sort of idea that you're warring against your neighbor. So if you're playing this at 4 players, you're always going to be fighting against the player to the left and the player to your right. In the solo experience, you're always fighting against that AI, but you still have to manage 2 fronts. And so you have to really kind of keep your combat pretty balanced because you could win with one side and lose with the other. And obviously you don't want to do that. Other than that, I would tend to say that it's probably a pretty similar experience. The competitive game of this, from what I understand, is mostly heads down. Again, just that little bit of interaction between your opponents in warfare and your opponents in terms of those votes. Other than that, I think it's going to be pretty similar. And lastly, the satisfaction of a win in this game, I think is pretty good because you do have some idea of how the AI is amassing points, but there's points that come from a lot of different areas in this game. And unless you're going to sit there from round to round and add up all of your score and all of their score, it's going to be a little bit of a surprise as you approach the end game. And I think that keeps things kind of interesting and a little bit of a, like I said, a surprise at the end of the game. I did like this. Like I said, it's been a little while since I played it. That's why it's not higher on this list, but still a very good solo experience. Twilight Inscription. Number 9 on this list was a bit of a surprise for me when I first played this game competitively, as I enjoyed it quite a bit more than its predecessor. This is Wyrmspan by Stonemaier Games. This is a wingspan game. Of course, in Wingspan, you were attracting birds. Now you're attracting dragons, and you're expanding into these 3 caves, inviting those dragons to live there, and you'll even visit them throughout the game, getting yourself extra resources, extra things, extra cards, extra whatever, and hopefully triggering off some unique actions out of those dragons to, of course, collect a lot of points. I enjoyed this quite a bit over the Wingspan game, especially for the fact that in this game, you have a differing number of actions from round to round. You start off with a set number of action points, but you can get more of them as you play, and so there's a lot more emphasis on playing efficiently, on trying to get as many things out of each of your actions as you can, so you can try and get more actions to outlast your opponents and get more points. Definitely a reason that I've enjoyed this game quite a bit more. Now, the Automa factory that Stonemaier tends to employ in these games is very popular for a good reason, and it's not much different in this game. So let me go ahead and break it down. Your setup is mostly the same in Wyrmspan. You do need some components of another player color, but you don't have to manage an AI board. There is also a deck of cards that you kind of set up at the beginning of the game to dictate the difficulty of the game experience that you want to have. And of course, you're going to have to learn what those cards do. And so that takes me into the teach. Your teach is fairly easy. There is a separate book in this game that teaches you the solo play, and it's a little bigger than you might want it to be, but I'll mention that the last sort of half of that rule book is, I believe, what's called the Valor variant. There's a different way that you can actually play this game solo. I have not dabbled into that, so I don't know how it works, but it actually works differently than the multiplayer experience. Puts more emphasis on what you're doing and how you're expanding into your caves, and that sort of dictates what your opponent can do and how they might score. Like I said, I have not played with that, and so I won't really get into it. As far as managing the AI, fairly straightforward. When they are collecting cards, you just sort of stack them up. They sort of collect things throughout the game, and that just gives them a lot of endgame scoring, but you don't have to really get into any detailed flow charting with your opponent, which makes it pretty streamlined. As far as the similarity of experience, it is quite similar. There are a couple cards in this game that will come out that may say do things compared to your opponent, and the rules tell you to simply just discard those cards and redraw. You kind of ignore those aspects of the game. There's not a whole lot of them. It does make it, though, a slightly different experience that you won't get to experience when you're playing it solo. So just simply keep that in mind. And as far as satisfaction of a victory, I think it feels pretty good to win this game. Like I said, you can set your difficulty, but you really don't know how many points your AI is going to have, since you're simply just collecting their cards and setting them off to the side. Again, unless you want to sit there and try and check their score midway through the game, you'll find that the end game score is a bit of a surprise, which keeps things pretty interesting and exciting. And that's why Wyrmspan is on this list at number 9. Number 8 on this list is a game I only recently played. However, it has been out for quite a long time. This is Fields of Arle by Uwe Rosenberg. Yes, I should mention that not every game on this list is going to be even relatively new, as I'm still always dabbling with different games over the past decade or so. Anyways, Fields of Arle is a 1 to 2 player game by Uwe Rosenberg, and believe it or not, it's about farming. Now, in my previous list, I had the Hallertau game, which is still a very, very fun game to play, although I have not played it in a while. That game introduces a lot of randomness in terms of these different decks that you can use from game to game. This game is a bit more straight-laced from play to play. It's going to be mostly similar every time that you play it, except that there are different buildings that you sort of randomly choose from at the beginning of the game, and you're going to use those throughout the game. This is a game about managing a farm. You have a player board in front of you that you start off with, and it's kind of a little restricted. There's a couple things already out, but you've also got some bog in the way that you have to clear out. You've got some dikes that are kind of holding you back, and so as you're playing, you're going to be expanding that farm. You're going to be adding, of course, different wildlife, maybe getting into some animal husbandry, and trying to get these different buildings out that will give you, of course, endgame scoring. There are also vehicles that you can build. They're just carts and maybe a boat or two. no old Ford trucks, I'm afraid. But of course, throughout this game, you're just trying to get as much done as you can. You're trying to expand the farm, trying to get a bunch of different kind of engines going, maybe, if you will, whether it's through cattle or sheep or horses, whether it's sort of exporting a lot of goods using those vehicles, or just trying to get a lot of points on your farm with the various crops and such that you can grow. As far as comparison to the multiplayer experience, it's actually quite interesting because it is almost the exact same game. With setup, you only need your own player board. You do not set up anything for an AI opponent. As far as the teach goes, there virtually isn't one, because all it says for your solo game is that you're just going to take your actions on your own and try to hit 120 points. That is considered an outstanding score for this game. That's it. There's nothing to manage for an AI opponent. You're simply taking any of the actions that you want to take on your turn. The only difference being in that in the competitive game, there is what's called a special action. The game is arranged into kind of like a summer and a winter season, and on those seasons, you can, once per round, one person can choose to take one action in the opposing season. So you can sort of cross over and do one winter action in the summer or a summer action in the winter. And if you do that, your opponent cannot do that. But if you do it, you will automatically forfeit being first player on the next season, whether you were supposed to be or not. You cannot take that special action in the solo game. You simply have to stick within the actions of your season, but that's it. Otherwise, it is the exact same similar game. Now, because there is that simple point score to aim for, it does mean that the satisfaction of this game is a little lackluster. You don't really have that nail-biting experience as you're playing this, although you don't necessarily know what your score is going to be until the very end, because there are so many different things that you will score from throughout the game. Again, you can sit there and count up your turns each round if that's what you want to do. Otherwise, you'll be a little bit surprised at the end of the game. I really like this because it is just a very chill, casual experience. You can try to, again, find the perfect path between all the different actions and try and maximize your score. You don't have to worry about anyone being impatient at how long you're taking to figure out your next move. And that's why I have quite enjoyed playing Fields of Arle, my number 8. Number 7 on this list is a game that hasn't received a ton of publicity. It's just kind of flown under the radar. This is Lunar Rush, designed by Steven Skippy Brown and published by Dead Alive Games. This is a game about trying to extract rare and valuable minerals off the surface of the moon and transport them back to Earth. Players will be building a sort of a lunar base throughout this game. They'll start with some materials already up there, and they'll be upgrading it throughout the game, also transporting materials from Earth to the moon to obviously aid them in those efforts. And there's this idea of these paths between the Earth and the moon that you can take at different speeds, but carrying different amounts of goods. So there is a fast route which gets from the Earth to the moon in the same turn, but it can only carry a couple things. On the other hand, there is a long route which takes 3 turns. So you'll leave the Earth on 1 turn, and 3 turns later, your goods finally arrive at the moon, but you can carry a ton of stuff, and there's a medium route in between. And as you're bringing those materials back to the Earth from the moon, you're selling them on the market, and that will adjust market prices. So of course there is this additional timing element of trying to be the first to get materials back to the Earth to sell. However, he who waits might have a whole lot more goods to sell. And so even though they may have a slightly lower market share out of each piece that they're selling, they'll probably still generate an awful lot of extra revenue in the process. The interesting thing about this game as I start to switch into the solo mode is that this is a 1 to 4 player game, and there are 4 routes between each of those celestial bodies. Now at 4 players you have a slow, a medium, and 2 fast routes. At 3 players you ignore one of the fast routes, but at 2 players you have to have something that's sort of simulating a player taking one of those routes. So you can either use a deck of blocking cards that just kind of randomly blocks the routes, or you can actually use one of the AIs at 2 players to simulate that 3rd player. Now in the solo mode, you can play against 2 AIs or try and do 1 AI and the blocking routes. Now I found the blocking route thing to be a little weird because there are already cards that start to block the routes when you get towards the end of the game. And obviously the slow and eventually the medium route would not reach either body before the end of the game. And so you have to start blocking those routes anyways, and there's 2 different decks to do it, and it just kind of becomes a little weird. And so I found that in the 2-player mode, I prefer to play with one of the AIs, and in the solo mode, I prefer to play with 2 AIs, as it's actually a smoother and more streamlined process than trying to play with these extra decks of blocking cards. As far as the setup goes for the solo game, it's fairly straightforward. These cards I'm referring to are kind of a smaller European size card, but there are 4 decks of cards for each AI. You have bidding cards, you have a up route and a down route deck, and then you have a deck of cards that are basically telling you which materials the AI is bringing home from the moon, depending on which route it is taking in that turn. So you do have 4 decks and 4 discard piles for each of your AIs, but again, they're kind of smaller cards. So it doesn't take up a huge footprint. They don't have a board to manage, so it's not that bad as far as setup goes. As far as the teach goes, I'm going to go with kind of moderate on this one because you do have to kind of understand how these different decks work. But I think once you get through a couple rounds of it, it'll start to click fairly well, and you'll be able to zip through it fairly quickly. And I would even say that it's fairly easy to kind of remember. I've stepped away from this game for a bit, came back to it, and didn't really have that much trouble remembering how it all goes. So the teach is like I said, fairly moderate, fairly easy to get through. As far as managing the AI, again, I'm going to go with kind of moderate here. Like I said, there are 4 different decks. There are many times we're going to be flipping over cards from those decks to see what the AI does, but it's pretty much a flip the card, block that space, or put these materials on that ship, and that's basically it. The only thing is, of course, when the AIs go and sell their resources back at the Earth, you're going to have to manage all their tracks and their points and all that for them, but it's not too bad. As far as similarity of the experience for you, the player, it's pretty much the same game. There's actually a lot of simultaneous play in this game, so even if you're going from, say, 2 to 4 players, it's not a drastically longer or a different gameplay experience. When you're working with your base and sort of managing all the different modules on your base, a lot of that's head down, multiplayer solo, as they say anyway. So I think the experience for you, the player, is pretty much the same. Also, you don't know what your opponents are doing in this game. You don't know what the AIs are doing in this game as far as which routes they want to go for. And so the randomness element of it is pretty similar as well. And lastly, in terms of satisfaction of play, and especially satisfaction of the victory, this game is actually fairly exciting. Now, when it is taking those routes, even in the easy mode of this game, each AI has a easy, medium, difficulty mode, you'll feel like it's bringing an awful lot of stuff home. You'll feel like it's being more productive than you are throughout most of the game. However, the AI doesn't have any endgame scoring for what it has built in a lunar base because there isn't one. You're not managing a board for the AI. So that's kind of nice. However, there is a slightly random element in that there is the deck of bidding cards which you're using to determine turn order to see who gets to pick their routes first in each round. And at the end of the game, you're going to have a couple of these cards left over, and the AIs will take the values of those cards, add them up, and multiply them by 5, and just get a big batch of endgame points. And you may not exactly know what those cards are going to be. You probably have some idea if you've been paying attention to how they're bidding. But basically, if they've been bidding low throughout the game and you've been possibly beating them in turn order, that means they're going to potentially be scoring an awful lot of points at game end. And you don't know exactly what they're going to be doing. So again, this is not one of those games you can necessarily track your score from round to round and kind of know exactly how things are going to fall out at the end of the game. But that does make the end game of this a bit more exciting, especially if you're able to pull off a win. I've had a lot of fun with this. As I was trying to get my head around this game for a review, I referred to the solo game a couple of times and ended up really enjoying it. Number 7, Lunar Rush. My next game on this list is a few years old, but I was only recently introduced to it, and it's become one of my favorite games. This is Imperial Settlers, Empires of the North, published by Portal Games and designed by Ignacy Trzewiczek. Now, this is a civilization-based tableau building game where you will be using a deck of cards to sort of establish a civilization. Each deck is specific to the civilization, so you'll kind of pick who you want to play as, get your deck of cards, and be using it throughout the whole game. There is a set of island cards that comes out in each game, and they will give you locations that you can eventually sail to and either explore for resources or conquer for potentially extra actions and, of course, some end game scoring. And throughout this game, you're going to just be taking cards from your deck. You'll be trying to find ways to get them played, paying your resources, managing resources, giving yourself extra actions to take, and just building up this culture in general. Some of those cards will give you extra actions. Some of them may even establish sort of engine building elements to make certain actions a little more powerful, maybe give you conversion abilities out of your resources, etc. There's also an action wheel that you'll be able to take to just trigger some extra things in the game, like maybe drawing more cards, basically playing a card for no additional cost, that kind of a thing. There's only a couple of actions, of course, that you can take during each round of this. Now, in the competitive game, you are playing until you hit a point threshold. You'll finish that round, add up any end game scoring, and that's basically the end of it. Now, in the solo game, it's a bit more scenario driven. So you'll set up the game the same as you normally would, which of course is fairly simple because it's just a deck of cards, an island board, maybe a resource tray, the action wheel, and that's basically it. But then you're going to use a scenario booklet. You'll choose your scenario for that game. It will give you possibly some extra locations that you can visit, maybe some extra actions that you can trigger, and it will also establish a couple of events, and you'll have just a couple of numbered tokens. I believe it's 1 to 5. You'll draw one of those events at the beginning of each round of the game, trigger that event, which may have a resource cost with a penalty if you cannot afford to pay it, and then you'll basically play a normal round after that. But you only get 4 rounds in this game. In the competitive game, you can play until someone hits that threshold. Here you're under a bit more of a timer crunch. I'll also mention that those actions I mentioned on the action wheel, they flip over. So if you use an action during a round, that token will flip over at the end of the round, and that action now has an extra cost to it in the following round, which could make it a little bit more difficult for you, especially as I've seen if the cost of that action is a resource that maybe your faction is not generally strong at being able to generate. And I'll get into that in just another moment. So I really do like this game. I like that efficiency puzzle as you're trying to take all these different actions on each of your rounds. Of course, you're kind of playing in each round until you have to pass, right? When there's just nothing more that you can afford to do, you pass and you kind of wait for everyone else to wrap up that round. And so I really enjoy that. There is definitely a timing element when you're trying to do things, get your order of operations down to really maximize every action that you're taking, and it's just a lot of fun. As far as a solo game goes, your setup is mostly the same. Like I said, you're going to set the game up for one player, and then you're going to choose your scenario and use that book and kind of have it sitting out in front of you. The teach is also fairly easy because it's just a quick introduction to how the scenario booklet works. The game itself is the same, except for, like I said, that action token flipping over. As far as managing an AI, there is no AI whatsoever. You just have to use a token on the track to keep track of which round that you're in, that's all. So no challenging managing of an AI there. As far as similarity of the game, though, it is a moderately different experience because, as I said, the actions could potentially get a little bit more expensive. That's something that you don't have to deal with in the base game. And like I said, it may require a resource that your faction is not easily able to generate. Now, you can use gold throughout the game, which can be used as a wild resource, but gold is, again, not easy for all factions to get their hands on equally. And as far as the sort of satisfaction of this game goes, it's going to kind of depend on your experience because you're just trying to hit a threshold of points, usually based on the scenario before the timer runs out, and it's a very simple pass-fail condition. You may find yourself in the third or fourth round and realize that you are just so far behind that you're probably not going to be able to catch up and win, and that means that another round or two later when you finally finish the game and you realize that you were right, it's just a little bit of a lackluster experience. Now, of course, if you're kind of really close to getting it done and you just barely manage to pull it off, or maybe just barely fall short of the mark, that can feel a little bit more exciting. But again, it's going to kind of be up to you as to if that's the experience that you are looking for. Still the game that I really enjoyed. Like I said, I like the puzzle of this. I like that sort of efficiency challenge of it. And so that did get it on the list at number 6, Imperial Settlers, Empires of the North. Number 5 on this list is a game you have probably heard of before. This is Earth by Inside Up Games. Now, a quick story about this. I was on a road trip with my wife. We were heading somewhere and she was driving and I was bored out of my mind. So I pulled out my phone, went to Board Game Arena, which I honestly don't use very often. I saw that this game was available. I knew of Earth, but I didn't play it. I hadn't played it. I didn't have it. And I decided to check it out. Ended up playing it 3 times solo, back to back, sitting there in the car, and had so much fun with it that I went ahead and got my own copy. This is a tableau building game where you're basically trying to build up an Earth environment in something of a unique biome, a unique climate for you in each playthrough. You're drawing a couple of cards at the beginning of the game that sort of dictate what's going to score for you, and then you're trying to collect those cards, get them into play in front of you, and you're doing all this by choosing an action on your turn, and everyone around the table gets to take that action, but you get a slightly better version of that action than them, and then of course when they take their actions, you get a slightly weaker version of the action that they chose. And these actions are giving you resources, they're giving you the ability to get these cards. Sometimes you can compost cards, which are simply just points per card at the end of the game. Again, getting cards in your tableau by paying earth or sort of dirt to get them into play, so on and so forth. Now, in the solo mode of this, there is an extra board that you'll have to set up, but you're not building a 16-card tableau for Gaia, which is your AI opponent. So the setup is fairly straightforward and fairly easy with this. As far as the teach goes, there is only 1 page of rules in the rulebook for the solo mode, although I did find that it was a bit more to get my head wrapped around than I expected. I kind of had to read it a couple times to make sure that I was understanding it correctly, and it still took a couple of turns to sort of figure it out. So mostly easy in terms of rules, but still some things you may have to kind of to work on to make sure that you have it right. As far as managing the AI, this is kind of moderate to even moderately high, because all the things that Gaia is doing. Gaia takes a turn when you take a turn, just like you would, and Gaia chooses an action using a different deck of cards. You take your action first based on whatever her card says, and then Gaia will act often based on what you've done. Gaia will collect a ton of resources, of cards. They'll grow trees, they'll get shrubs, all kinds of things throughout its turn, and you're constantly going to be pushing resources over onto its board. So it's a little bit more to manage the Gaia AI in this game. And of course, I got spoiled by doing a lot of that on Board Game Arena, which of course handles it all for you. As far as the similarity of the experience, it's mostly the same. It is slightly variable, again, in the fact that you're managing the Gaia AI, but its actions are a bit different from what a player might be doing. And so it's not going to necessarily feel the same as you're managing that AI itself. I'll also say that depending on how you play this game, if you are one who is very mindful of what other players can do and how their engines work, you might be intentionally choosing or not choosing actions based on how it might benefit your opponents. And if that is how you play, then this will feel a bit more commonplace for you, because you also have to do that with Gaia. You have to be mindful of what it does based on what you're able to do or what you choose. And again, if you kind of play with that sort of aggressive aspect in mind, you'll probably do okay against Gaia. Otherwise, you may not really realize how many points and what things you're funneling to Gaia throughout the game. So again, it makes it a bit of a variable experience. Now, I will say that as far as the satisfaction of the victory, you will notice that Gaia is amassing a ton of resources on her board. She scores huge decks of cards. She'll have tons of components that are all going to score at the end of the game. And you're constantly looking at that throughout the play going, oh, I just don't know if I have a chance. And so it is, often very satisfying if you manage to eke out a victory with this. There is also different difficulties that you can choose, which kind of changes the actions that it takes based on the actions that you choose. The only thing I'll say is that to just go through and count up all of her score at the end of the game can take a little while, which is again why I kind of nod towards the Board Game Arena version of this, but still just a very rewarding solo experience. Earth, my number 5. The next game on this list is another very big, very popular game. I'm almost a little embarrassed to have it on this list, but folks, this is Ark Nova by Capstone, designed by Matthias Vigue. Probably everyone knows about this game unless you've been living under a rock for the past 3 or 4 years. This is a very, very popular game, certainly made very popular by Tom Vasel of the Dice Tower, who had it as his number 1 for years and gave it a perfect 10. Anyways, this is a game where you're trying to build a zoo. Now, this is far more of a complicated game than I can get into, even with a very quick summary, but you will be managing a zoo of a kind of a hex grid polyomino board in front of you. You'll be placing animals into those enclosures, although the animals just kind of stack off to your side. You just have to use an enclosure of the appropriate size when you place an animal out. It doesn't necessarily, it's not indicated that it's in that particular enclosure. Anyways, you're putting these animal cards out in front of you. You've got administration work that you can do across the board. You've got various projects that you can work with. You've got various other zoos that are kind of simulated in a global environment that you can interact with. And there are 2 tracks around this board. The one is based on the reputation of your zoo. So as you're placing out animals and various attractions in your zoo, you're gaining more reputation. But there's also a conservation track, which is sort of tracking how much you're doing to help animals and awareness of animals and other things across the globe. And eventually you want those 2 tracks to cross each other. When they do, that triggers the end of the game. And the person who gets the most gap on each side of those tracks, who crosses each other the furthest, will win the game. Which means if you don't cross, you can actually have a negative score, which some people may find a little off-putting. Now, I'll say this. The original game comes with a solo mode. It is simply a race type of a game where you have a set number of rounds to try and get those 2 tracks to cross. There is no AI whatsoever. There's no teach. There's really nothing to it, but it's also a very unrewarding experience. There are no other players that are kind of helping to take cards off the main board to kind of keep things fresh and moving, and it just makes the solo mode of this very, very unappealing, which might make you wonder, Jeff, why is this on this list? Well, folks, I want to tell you about Arno, the artificial randomized neutral opponent. This was created by a gamer out on Board Game Geek, and then even implemented into a web applet on a web page, which sort of encapsulates everything about Arno onto it, and you can simply tab through the various buttons and have a AI-driven opponent through a computer or a smart device in front of you on the table, and you can play a full game of Ark Nova against Arno, and it is an incredibly rewarding experience. Now, I will say this. I looked into Arno first by downloading the rules and even printed them off and was trying to kind of understand them. So let me go ahead and get through my list, and I'll explain this as I go. The setup for Arno is that you'll have to have a separate board and all the pieces for another player. So the setup is a little bit more involved than if you're just setting up your own board and the main board for a competitive game. But it's not really too much to manage, although this game has a rather large footprint, so keep that in mind. As far as the teach, the rules to Arno are very, very, very intricate. There are a lot of dice checks that you'll be using throughout the game. You're going to have to provide your own dice. The game doesn't come with any. And you'll be rolling dice to determine which action Arno wants to use. You might be rolling those dice again to determine which thing it's going to interact with based on the action that it's choosing, and even additional dice checks possibly. So there's a lot of charts you have to reference based on the difficulty that you've chosen, the action that it has rolled, and the pieces that it may want to interact with based on the action that it chose. However, if you're using the web applet, you don't have to do any of that. You pick your difficulty at the beginning of the game and you literally just click a button. It'll tell you what to do and you do it. It's that simple. And so again, managing that AI can either be very, very, very complicated or very, very, very easy depending on how you want to play this. And I don't know why you'd want to use the paper version over a tablet or something like that, unless of course you're in a no internet environment, which would make your situation somewhat unique. As far as the similarity of the game experience, it is fantastic. You feel like you're playing against an opponent. You can even use multiple Arnos if you want to simulate having a full table of players, which will keep the market of cards moving very, very rapidly, keeps the game very random as far as what's available out there from turn to turn. There's not a lot of interaction in this game anyways, but there are various markets of cards and components which, again, people are taking from very quickly, sort of blocking spaces and whatnot, triggering these coffee breaks that happen throughout the game. And the more players you have, the more that those things are going to happen. And Arno will simulate all of that very, very well. And as far as the satisfaction of the game, I think it's fantastic. It's a very, very fun experience all the way through this game, especially, again, using that web applet. You can, again, set the difficulty of the game. So if you want a very, very hard opponent to go against, you can do that with Arno. And I'm going to tell you, I have very, very rarely sort of turned to the internet when it comes to playing board games, but I found this out by accident. There's actually quite a lot of games out on this website that have solo modes sort of implemented. A lot of them are, again, player created, and they are fantastic, and I want to dive into them even more. I'm going to put the links to Arno and the online web applet in the description of this video. Be sure and check them out. If this is a game that you have had sitting on your shelf and you keep thinking, man, I really wish I could play this some more, you should really check out Arno, and they even have the new expansion to it, Waterworlds, I believe it's called, available that you can activate as well as part of your experience. Just a fantastic implementation of a solo bot, Arno, Ark Nova, number 4. Here we are at number 3 on this list, and this was a game that I really debated whether I wanted to put on here. I love the game very much, but there is a bit of a negative stigma around this. It is also a little hard to come by, and it's very unfortunate because I just love this game. This is the Age of Atlantis by Eldorado Games, designed by Daniel Aronson. As I said, this game's a little hard to come by. Daniel never quite finished delivering this to all the Kickstarter backers. A lot of people did not get their games. And so as a result, the scorings and such of this game out online have kind of tanked. It just was not well managed, unfortunately. But the folks who have gotten to play this and really kind of gotten into it have really enjoyed the experience. This is a game where you're sort of representing a faction on the city of the island of Atlantis, and you're defending it against incoming attackers and invaders while trying to sort of build up the city of Atlantis, even defend it with these massive, powerful, sort of steampunkish myths, and researching technology. It has an actual tech tree to it. just a lot that you get to do in this game. Some engine building elements for sure. This sort of unique tower defense idea of trying to protect the central city in the middle of the island. And like I said, I've just had an absolute blast playing this game over the past several years. The solo experience of this is a little interesting. So what you do when you play this game solo is you only get to play against one of the 4 factions. There's basically kind of an AI bot, if you will, created for just one of those factions, and it has a unique deck of cards that you go through in each round to determine what it's going to do and where it's going to do it on these sort of 8 different slices in the cardinal and ordinal directions of the compass on this map. So your setup of this game for the solo is fairly similar. You will have to use an extra player board. You'll basically have to set up for 2 players. And of course, again, one of those players has to be the green faction. And you'll set up all their pieces. And so it's a little bit more involved to set this up for 2 players. But there is, again, only one little deck. They're very, very small square cards that you'll get out for your AI opponent. The teach is fairly straightforward, but that's almost because the AI is very easy. It's sort of just kind of on rails in what it does. But what's really interesting when it comes to managing this AI is that the cards, like I said, they'll tell you what they do, but they'll actually often print what the faction is going to do on the top of the card. So you actually have advanced knowledge of what the AI is going to do on its next turn. You might just not exactly know where it wants to do it. There is a little bit of surprise in how those cards are revealed. And so it's kind of interesting, and it makes the gameplay of this a little bit different from playing against a human opponent, because you can either sort of choose to try and block the AI to prevent it from doing what it may want to do, or, of course, you can keep working on your own engine, your own system, your own sort of ambitions if you want throughout this game. There is a difficulty level that you can set by this simply by how many workers the opponent starts with at the beginning of the game. So it'll eventually kind of time out, possibly sooner than you will. And so you might get to take a couple of uninterrupted actions after the AI has already passed. And again, you can change that difficulty at the beginning of the game. And so it makes this overall a very unique solo experience. Now for me, I absolutely love this game, and I love trying to find different ways to play it, different strategies to kind of employ and goof off with. And so for me, I find it very, very fun to play it, and I'll often just try to constantly beat my previous high score. I'll try to just see how high I can push myself up the score track, usually obliterating the AI in the process, because I do tend to play a little bit on the easier modes because I just want the fun of playing the game. So your mileage might quite vary on this. This might just be one that is very specific to me and the way that I like to play, and the fact that I just love this game. It is my #1 ranked game of all time personally. So yeah, take all that into mind when you're considering the fact that this is #3 on my list, the Age of Atlantis. My #2 on this list is, again, another one of my just favorite games of all times to play, regardless of player count. This is Meadow by Rebel Studios. This is another tableau building game where you're putting out these just beautiful cards in front of you and sort of building this meadow. And it has this idea of an ecosystem. So you may have a tree card in front of you. That tree card may let you put a bird card out as the bird wants there to be a tree in your meadow, and it will cover up that tree icon, so you cannot use that tree again. But now you have a bird icon, and so you may be able to put out a bigger bird or something that might eat birds or rely on birds to thrive as a card that can stack on top of the bird card. And you're doing that through multiple columns of this tableau. You've got different biomes you'll be putting these cards out into. There is also sort of a campfire board, which will have some symbols randomly placed on it at the beginning of the game, and if at any point you have 2 adjacent symbols present in your meadow, you can go to that campfire, and it's almost like you're kind of telling a story of things that you have seen in your personal meadow to score some extra points. A lot of the only complaint I think I've ever really seen about this game is that it can tend to run a little long. Even at just 2 players, it can be a little bit of a long game because you're looking at all these different cards that are out there on the market and trying to figure out what you can get played in your tableau. You're maybe working towards trying to get a specific symbol played so you can go and score it on the campfire board, and it can just tend to make people stop and slow down and think about their turns a little bit. And given the theme of this, it makes perfect sense, but yes, it can make for a slightly longer game. And that's where the solo play of this comes in. I have had so much fun playing this game solo. And all you're doing with this is that you have a very small little board that you'll set next to your play area. There are 3 little round discs that get placed against that board. You pick your player color, and the other 3 player colors get put around this board. You have these action tokens that you're slotting into the main board to choose which card you want to take. You'll use all of the action tokens of the unused player colors and just sort of pile them up. It says to put them in a stack. I just put them in a sort of a chaotic pile in front of me, and I'll just randomly choose from that pile throughout the game. You'll reference the color on that little board to tell you which side to put that token on, and then based on the number on that token is where you'll put it along that edge and take that corresponding card. That's it. The cards just get stacked up for your AI opponent, and they'll score their face value at the end of the game. You're not actually building this tableau for the opponent, and so you have very, very little extra table space you need for your AI opponent. The setup is very easy. The teach is literally what I just explained to you. So the teach is very easy. Managing that AI is very easy. You're picking up a token, referencing your chart, which after a while you don't even need to do. You're going to memorize where those colors go. You'll put it in, you'll take a card, and you go and you take your turn again. The similarity of the experience is still fairly high because it's basically all this game is. There's not a lot of interaction between players. You're just simply drawing tiles or cards off of this board, replacing them immediately from these 3 decks. And the only thing that you may find is someone simply takes the card that you were trying to grab yourself. And so there's a little bit of a race element to say, well, hey, I'm going to go ahead and get that card now. Maybe I'm not ready to play it. And that's sort of the risk that you have to take as you're playing this game. And as far as the satisfaction of the play goes, you're simply adding up the card values that the opponent gets and trying to beat their score. You can play a different mode of this where you're trying to even set a higher score as recommended in the rulebook. And there are a couple expansions of this which have their own solo rules, which is nice to see that they've continued to evolve the solo player based on all those expansions coming out. However, I really just like the base game itself because it has a relatively small footprint, and I can tell you that I have played this in the quiet of the night at some rustic cabins out in the Shenandoah Mountains of Virginia. Just me, maybe a cuckoo clock ticking in the background, the sounds of nature at night, and a couple games of Meadow solo. One of my just absolute favorite solo experiences, and a beautiful game to play to boot. Meadow, my number 2. Here we are at the top of the list. My number 1 game is a bit unique of all the other ones that you've seen here in this list because this is the only game that is only for solo play. This is Legacy of You by Garphill Games and Shem Phillips. Now, I will say this at the top of this. I've just never been a big fan of the Garphill Games library. I've actually played most of their games, with none of the expansions though, if I'm honest, and I've just never found one that I truly, truly enjoyed. They're all very similar in sort of your end game goals, and what you're just trying to do is moving up tracks, setting up some, just point salad type of collection of points. They always feel a little bit abstract to me. I've never been able to really immerse myself in the theme of any of those games. And if I'm honest, I am just not a fan of the Miko's art style, which is used in all of those games. This game is illustrated by Sam Phillips. I don't know if there's any relation there to Shem or not. I believe it's his brother, but I could be wrong. I love the way this game looks, and if I were to rank this and all the other Garphill games, this one would be number 1 by a considerable margin. I have really, really, really enjoyed playing this game. Now, this is set in ancient China, and you're, I believe, a governor who is trying to build canals along the Yellow River, which was very prone to flooding back then. And so you're trying to build canals for that water to be able to go and to stop flooding out the region. And of course, you're doing that under the constant threat of barbarian attacks. You're going to have a deck of cards that represent your townspeople. There's kind of an available deck, and then there's your ready deck, the people who are actually already in your town. And then you're going to have a couple barbarians along the top of the board. You have a couple of canal cards that you're going to be trying to remove in front of a flood token that kind of moves across the board. And you're also going to have a couple of sort of encampment cards on the board as well that you're trying to clear out of the way to give yourself more room to expand your village. And on your turn, you're simply going to have a hand of these townsfolk cards. and you can just sort of take whatever actions you want to take in any order that you want to take them. You can kind of do whatever you want to do in this game. You may be discarding those townsfolk to get a resource from them. You may even send them away to get more or additional resources. You might tuck them under the board to get extra income through the income phases of the game. And in some of those instances, you're not going to get those people back. So you've really got to be careful in how you go through that deck, because if you ever completely run out of townsfolk, well, then you've been overrun by barbarians and you've lost the game. Every time you would reshuffle that deck is when the floodwaters advance, and if the floodwater advances and you have not built the canal in front of it, you'll flood the village and you'll lose the game. And so with those cards and with the buildings that you're placing out, you're getting additional actions that you can take. You're getting extra worker placement locations that you can put these little wooden worker tokens on, so they're kind of different from your townsfolk. You're using them to sometimes convert them into workers or just getting resources. And again, this whole thing kind of has this efficiency, sort of order of operations idea to it, and that, okay, well, if I just go ahead and I take this action, I can get a worker. But if I wait and I do something with a different worker, then I can play this card and get extra abilities or extra things out of it. And now I'm going to be able to go and fight that barbarian, which will give me some rewards back. And that's going to set me up to expand the canal and just sort of do all these things on my turn. I really, really enjoy this. There's also a separate deck of cards where it kind of creates a story. And so as you're clearing various canal cards or triggering various events throughout the game, even as you win or lose each round of this game, it's going to tell you to resort to this storybook based on the value that's on these cards, and then they will reveal additional cards from this story deck, which kind of get inserted in other areas of the game. You may get more townsfolk. You may get more difficult barbarians to work against. You may even get some extra events that kind of come out alongside that game and give you other things to work towards. Of course, I don't want to spoil any of those in this video, but even losing this game is helpful. You actually get certain things that will help you in future plays of it. And if you win the game, you may get things that make the game a little bit more challenging, like, again, more difficult barbarians or a camp or something you may have to deal with. You have to win the game 7 times to overall win the campaign. And of course, if you lose it 7 times, you lose the campaign. And all you have to do is just separate back out those story cards, and you're ready to start this game all over again. I have had a blast playing with this. Of course, as far as all of my attributes for solo games, they all go out the window because, of course, the setup is the setup for the solo game. The teach is just learning the game, so none of that really applies. There is no AI to manage. Simply at the end of each round, all the barbarian cards that are still present, which means you have not cleared them out in that round, they will attack you. They may take out some of your townsfolk. They may cost you some of your resources. And of course, if you can't do that, then you'll be shedding additional townsfolk. And again, if you ever run out of townsfolk, you have lost that round of the game. The satisfaction of playing this, though, is fairly high because there are different ways that you can lose this game. I lost my very first playthrough of it quite poorly, but then I did start to figure out this game, and the only other time I've lost it was because I frankly got a little too cocky and shed cards a little too quickly and ended up paying the price for it. But I've just really enjoyed this. It is a very nice game to kind of set up. It does not take up a huge footprint on a table, and so I can kind of set this up on our kitchen table while I'm watching some TV or spending some time with my wife and still get a really nice, solid game experience without having to go through a very complicated setup, a lot of challenging AIs to manage. This is a game that I don't think I'll ever forget how to play, quite frankly, because it is so streamlined and just a fantastic experience. That is my #1 Legacy of You. Folks, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope it's been worth the 4-year wait. And I'm going to work on another video of some games that didn't make this list because either maybe I didn't really enjoy the experiences or they're games I haven't gotten to check out yet. So hopefully you'll get to see those videos fairly soon. And feel free to share with me any games that you love to play solo, what you like about them, and any other suggestions that you might have. Other than that, again, thank you for watching. And folks, I'll chat with you again soon. Cheers.